The rain in the Pacific Northwest isn't always a downpour most of the time. It's just a persistent gray mist that clings to everything. It settles into the fabric of your coat and turns the asphalt of our suburban street into a dark, reflective mirror. I spent my Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday. The days have started to bleed together since the market slowed down, driving my SUV EC between three different listings in a neighborhood where the HOA monitors the exact shade of beige allowed for your curtains. Being a real estate agent in this part of the country requires a specific kind of performance. You have to be sunny even when the sky is the color of a wet sidewalk. I spent 2 hours showing a four-bedroom colonial to a couple from California who looked at our local greenery as if it were a sign of impending mold. I smiled. I pointed out the updated VAC system and the proximity to the good elementary school. I did the dance, the one where I pretend that a 30-year mortgage is a romantic journey rather than a financial shackle. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, my face felt tight from the forced expressions. The house was quiet when I walked in, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. Mark was in his home office, the door shut, likely on a Zoom call with the regional directors. He's a senior VP now, which means his time is segmented into 15-minute increments, none of which seem to be allocated for greeting his wife when she gets home. I walked into the kitchen and saw a pile of mail on the counter, mostly flyers for lawn aeration services and a statement from our 401k provider. I started unloading the dishwasher. It's a ritual I've performed almost every night for 12 years. I don't think Mark has ever actually seen me do it, not in the sense that he's registered the action. He sees the clean plates in the cupboard the next morning and assumes they simply manifest there, like a natural resource. I remember when we first moved here, I think it was 2011, and he told me he loved how I managed the household. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now, it feels like a job description for a position I never applied for and cannot quit. I went to the pantry to start dinner chicken and roasted vegetables, the kind of meal that is healthy but lacks any real personality. While I was reaching for the olive oil, I noticed the spice rack was leaning. I spent a few minutes trying to straighten it, but one of the brackets was loose. I stared at the screw for a moment, wondering if I should go find a screwdriver or just leave it. I decided to leave it. It didn't really matter if the paprika tilted slightly to the left. When Mark finally emerged from his office, he didn't look at me. He looked at the clock. "I've got a conference call with Singapore in 20 minutes, he said, heading straight for the coffee maker. "Did you see the email from the HOA about the driveway sealant? We're technically out of compliance." "I saw it," I said. "We should probably just hire someone to do it. I don't have the bandwidth to deal with the contractor bids right now." He didn't ask about my day. He didn't ask if the California couple liked the colonial. He just stood there, waiting for the coffee to drip, his mind already halfway across the Pacific. I stood 3 feet away from him, and for a second I wondered if I could just step back into the shadows of the kitchen and see how long it would take for him to notice I was gone. I didn't move, of course. I just handed him a mug. The evening followed the usual script. We ate in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but rather heavy, like a thick blanket that had been washed too many times. We talked about the property taxes and the kids' soccer schedule. I found myself watching his hands as he spoke, strong, capable hands that spent most of their time typing on a MacBook or gripping a golf club. He was talking about a merger, something about synergy and vertical integration. I nodded in the right places, but my mind was drifting to the way the rain was streaking against the dining room window. After dinner, I went to the hall closet to find the heavy-duty vacuum. The closet was a disaster area, a graveyard for things we intended to fix or donate 3 years ago. I was looking for the vacuum attachment, but the shelf was blocked by a stack of old tax returns and some haphazardly shoved winter coats. I stopped for a moment, frustrated by a tangle of old charging cables. There were at least 6 different types of USB cables in there, most of them for devices we didn't even own anymore. I spent a good 5 minutes trying to untangle a white cord from a black one, feeling a strange, bubbling irritation that this small piece of plastic was fighting me. I eventually just shoved the whole mess back into the corner. As I pushed aside a box of old holiday decorations, my hand hit something hard and metallic. It was a small, lockable filing box, the kind you buy at Target for $20, tucked far back behind a row of boots. I didn't recognize it. Mark usually kept his important documents in the fireproof safe in the basement, and I kept my things in the bedroom vanity. I pulled the box out. It was heavy. There was no label on it, just a layer of dust that made my fingertips gray. The lock was a simple 3-digit combination. I didn't know the code, but the latch was old and slightly misaligned. I gave it a sharp tug, and with a metallic snap that sounded far too loud in the quiet hallway, the lid popped open. I didn't find tax documents or old passports. Inside were several manila envelopes, neatly stacked. On top of them was a burner phone of those cheap prepaid models that you can buy at a pharmacy and a small leather notebook. I felt a sudden sharp chill that had nothing to do with the draft coming from the front door. I reached for the first envelope. Inside were printed photographs. They weren't photos of us or the kids or any family vacation. They were photos of a woman. She was younger than me, maybe in her late 20s, with dark hair and a smile that looked genuine in a way I hadn't felt in a decade. There were photos of her at a cafe, photos of her walking a dog in a park I didn't recognize, and photos of her entering an apartment building in the city. I sat down on the floor of the closet, the vacuum forgotten beside me. I flipped through the notebook. It wasn't a diary, it was a log. Dates, times, and locations. Tuesday, 4 p.m. The blue bean. She seemed tired today. Friday, 8 p.m. Dinner at La Valeris. The handwriting was unmistakably Mark's. The precise, slanted cursive he used for his formal letters. I stared at the photos, the gray light of the hallway dimming as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. I could hear him in the other room, his voice booming with confidence as he started his call with Singapore, discussing growth and strategy and the future of the company. I sat there in the dark, surrounded by old coats and tangled cables, holding the evidence of a life he had built in the gaps of ours. I just felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me, like the first frost of November. I closed the box slowly, making sure the latch clicked back into place, and pushed it back into the shadows behind the boots. The next morning arrived with the same oppressive grayness that had defined the last few months. I woke up at 6:15 a.m., the sound of the rain tapping a rhythmic, mindless beat against the bedroom window. Beside me, Mark was still asleep, his breathing deep and steady, the sleep of a man who believes his world is exactly as he has arranged it. I stayed still for a long time, watching the way the light filtered through the charcoal curtains, wondering how a person could look so peaceful while maintaining a secret life in a Target filing box. I got out of bed and went downstairs. The house felt different now. It wasn't that the furniture had shifted or the walls had closed in. It was more like I had suddenly noticed a layer of grime on everything that I had previously mistaken for a polish. I made coffee, the smell of the roast filling the kitchen, and I waited for him to come down. When he finally entered the room, he was already dressed in a crisp white button-down and tailored slacks, looking every bit the senior VP. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even look at me. He just reached for the coffee pot and checked his phone. "I have a breakfast meeting at 8, he said, his voice still thick with sleep, but already shifting into that professional clipped tone. "I might be late for dinner tonight. There's a discrepancy in the quarterly projections that the board is obsessing over." I leaned against the counter, holding my mug with both hands. "Is the discrepancy something that requires you to spend a lot of time in the city?" He paused, the coffee mid-pour. He looked at me then, his eyes scanning my face with a flicker of confusion, as if he were trying to remember which version of me he was dealing with. "What does that even mean?" "Just wondering," I said. "You've been spending more time in the city lately. I noticed the mileage on the car." Mark sighed, a slow theatrical sound that suggested I was being an inconvenience. "Lily, I'm running a regional operation. The city is where the headquarters are. Why are you suddenly auditing my commute? Are you feeling okay? You seem a bit edgy." The word edgy hung in the air. It was a subtle choice. He didn't call me crazy, but he suggested that my perception of reality was slightly off. It was a move he'd perfected over the years, the gentle nudge, the suggestion that my concerns were symptoms of a mood swing rather than reactions to his behavior. Ifine, I said, my voice flat. I just thought we could talk about our travel budget for the next quarter. I saw the 401k statement and I wanted to see if we were on track for the goals we set. He laughed, a short, dry sound. The travel budget? I handle the corporate accounts. Lily, you handle the house. We agreed on this. Why are you worrying about the 401k now? It's managed. Everything is managed. He didn't see the way my grip tightened on the mug. He saw a wife who was perhaps a bit too stressed from a slow real estate market. Saw a woman whose primary function was to ensure the driveway was sealed and the children's soccer cleats were clean. He didn't see that I had spent the last 14 hours visualizing the leather notebook and the photos of a woman with a genuine smile. I just want to be involved, Mark, I said. You are involved, he replied, already turning back to his phone. You're the heart of this home. Just try to relax, maybe take a spa day or something. I'll put it on the card. He left 5 minutes later, the sound of his SUV pulling out of the driveway, echoing through the quiet street. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the spot where he had been standing. The heart of the home comment felt like a consolation prize, a way to keep me occupied with the domestic machinery, so I wouldn't look too closely at the gears. I waited until 10 a.m., making sure he was well into his meetings before I went into his home office. The room smelled of expensive mahogany and old paper. It was a sanctuary of productivity, meticulously organized. I started by looking for his primary password list. I knew he kept on. Mark was too arrogant to trust his own memory with every single corporate login, but he was too cautious to keep it on a computer. I started searching through the desk drawers. The first drawer was filled with stationery and high-end pens. The second was a chaotic mix of electronics. I was looking for a small black notebook or perhaps a folded piece of paper, but I got sidetracked by a plastic bin of old batteries. There were dozens of them, 9 volts all tossed together in a jumble. Some were leaking a white, crusty powder. It was honestly disgusting. Who just lets batteries leak into a plastic bin? I spent nearly 10 minutes picking through them, wondering if the acid had seeped into the plastic, feeling a strange, visceral need to organize the mess before I remembered why I was in the room in the first place. I shoved the batteries back and moved to the third drawer. Underneath a stack of old gym memberships and a brochure for a luxury watch brand, I found a small leather-bound index. It wasn't a password list per se, but a series of codes and hints. I went to the living room and opened my laptop. I had access to our joint checking and savings, but Mark had always kept a separate investment account that he claimed was for long-term growth, something I wasn't supposed to touch or worry about. He told me it was a complex portfolio of diversified assets. Using the hints from the notebook, I managed to bypass the security questions. The password was a combination of their first dog's name and the year he got his first promotion. I felt a wave of nausea as I realized he hadn't changed the password in 6 years. The account was in a portfolio of diversified assets. It was a slush fund. I scrolled through the transactions, my eyes blurring as I processed the numbers. There were regular withdrawals amounts that weren't large enough to trigger a red flag in our joint budget, but consistent. 500 here, 2,000 there. The descriptions were vague. Consulting fee, market research, miscellaneous expense. Then I saw the payments to a luxury apartment complex in the city. Monthly rent. A 2-bedroom unit in a neighborhood where the coffee shops sold lat for $9 and the streets were lined with boutique hotels. He wasn't just seeing someone, he was maintaining a second residence. He had built a parallel life, funded by a secret account, while I was worrying about the HOA's rules on driveway sealant. I sat back in the chair, the silence of the house feeling heavy around me. I thought about the last few years, the late nights at the office, the weekend retreats for corporate strategy, the way he would come home and tell me how much he appreciated my stability. I realized then that stability was just another word for convenience. I was the reliable base he could return to after he had finished playing the more exciting version of himself in the city. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything. I didn't just look at the bank statements, I went back to the filing box in the closet. I took photos of the burner phone, the notebook, and the pictures of the woman. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud drive that Mark didn't know existed. I remember it was a Thursday wait. No, it was a Friday, I think, because the trash collectors had already come by. When I decided to do a little more digging, I wanted to know who she was. The woman in the photos wasn't a random encounter. I found her on LinkedIn. Her name was Alina. She was a junior analyst at one of the firms Mark had consulted for over the last 2 years. She was 26. She had a degree from a university Mark had bragged about during one of his networking events. As I looked at her profile picture, the same genuine smile from the photos, didn't feel the jealousy I expected. I didn't feel the urge to scream or throw things. Instead, I felt a cold clinical detachment. I felt like I was analyzing a property that had been misrepresented in the listing. The foundation was cracked, the wiring was outdated, and the seller had lied about the square footage. It was a bad investment. I closed the laptop just as I heard the garage door open. I quickly tidied the office, making sure the batteries were exactly where I had found them, and the leather index was tucked back under the gym memberships. When Mark walked into the room, he looked tired. He loosened his tie and slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples. "Tough day?" I asked. "The board is breathing down my neck," he groaned. "I don't know why they can't just trust my projections. It's like they want me to fail." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the expensive fabric of his shirt and the carefully groomed hair, and for the first time he looked small to me. He looked like a man who was terrified of being caught in a lie, even though he believed he was too smart to ever be caught. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. "You're very good at managing things." He didn't notice the irony. He just nodded and asked if I could bring him a glass of water. I walked to the kitchen and filled the glass, but I didn't bring it back immediately. I stood by the sink, watching the rain continue to blur the edges of the neighborhood. I thought about the 401k, the secret apartment, and the burner phone. I thought about the 12 years I had spent being the heart of the home, maintaining a facade of suburban perfection while my husband was spending our future on a 26-year-old analyst. I realized I didn't want a divorce, not yet. A divorce would be a sudden move, a loud move. It would be a reaction. And Mark thrived on reactions. He knew how to manipulate them, how to gaslight them away. What I wanted was leverage. I took the glass of water back into the office and set it on the desk. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small smudge of dirt on the mahogany surface. I reached out and wiped it away with my finger, leaving the surface clean. "Thanks, Lil," he said, not looking up from his screen. "You're welcome," I replied. I went upstairs and began to plan. I didn't know exactly how it would end, but I knew that the performance was over. I wasn't the sunny agent anymore, and I certainly wasn't the stable wife. I was just a woman with a cloud drive full of evidence and a very long memory. I went into the bathroom and started brushing my teeth, focusing on the minty taste of the toothpaste and the sound of the water running in the sink. It was a boring, normal Tuesday or Wednesday, and for the first time in years I felt completely awake. It had been raining for like 3 weeks straight. Just that annoying Pacific Northwest drizzle that doesn't really fall, it just hangs there. Everything was damp. I spent most of my Monday, or maybe it was Tuesday, I can't remember. Maya had a dentist appointment, just sitting in my SUV. I was parked a few blocks away from this luxury apartment building downtown. I'd found the place through some secret bank statements Mark had. Actually, my windshield wipers were starting to streak, which was just great. I kept thinking I should have put new blades on last month. Anyway, the last few days had been weird. I was still doing everything. Making coffee, telling the kids to grab their gym bags, smiling at the neighbors when we talked about the hoa, being annoying about porch decorations. But I felt like I was just pretending. Like I was playing the part of Lily, the stable wife, while the real me was just counting down the minutes until I could drive to the city. Getting into the building was easier than I thought. Mark was just careless, I guess. Or maybe he just didn't think it'd actually do it. I'd found a spare key in a Target filing box, just a little silver key with a plastic tag that said City. It was buried under some old boots and tax returns. The lobby smelled like one of those fancy hotels. There was a guy in a suit at the front who nodded at me, but I didn't really look at him. I just kept my head down. My coat was damp and sticking to me. I felt like I was breaking in, even though I had the key. The elevator ride was quiet. When I got to the 12th floor, I stood there for a minute for a while. I don't know. I wondered if I should just leave. Like if I just went back home to my beige curtains and roasted vegetables. Could I just pretend I didn't know? But I turned the key. The lock clicked. The place was a lot. It wasn't just a place to cheat, it was like a whole different life. Everything was white and charcoal gray. Huge windows. No piles of mail, no tangled charging cables, none of the stuff you have when you've been married 20 years and have 2 kids. It was just empty and expensive. There were peonies in a vase on the table. I hate peonies. The smell is too much. Mark knows that, so he never buys them for me. But there they were, right next to some art books and a bottle of champagne that was already open. I went into the bedroom. There was a photo on the nightstand of Mark and Alina on a beach. Mark was laughing. Not that fake social laugh he uses at dinner parties to make people feel comfortable, but like, actually laughing. He looked young. He looked like a guy who didn't have to worry about driveway sealant or board meetings. I sat on the bed. The sheets felt like silk. I just felt this heavy pressure in my chest, and it was hard to breathe for a second. It wasn't even just the cheating. It was that he had this entire version of himself that I wasn't allowed to see. He gave all that lightness to some 26-year-old analyst. I started looking through the drawers. In the dresser, I found navy blue sheets. He always told me navy was too bold for our bedroom. I found her skincare stuff too. Serums and creams that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Then I found the folder in a desk drawer. Just a plain manila envelope. It was a lease, some utility bills, and a draft of a legal strategy. He wasn't just having an affair. He was planning his exit. There were notes about what our house was worth, how to split the 401k, a timeline for transitioning the family. He was treating our marriage like a business deal that wasn't paying off anymore. I spent a few minutes just reading the way he wrote. He called me the domestic anchor. He said that stability was good for the kids, but it was a stagnant environment for him. I felt kind of sick. I walked back into the living room and saw a bowl of keys and some change on a side table. Next to it were these diamond earrings. Small and elegant. That's where the money from our investment account was going. Into her ears. I went into the kitchen and opened the cabinets. The wine glasses were so thin and fragile. I thought about our mismatched glasses at home, the ones we've had since our first apartment. I don't know when things became stagnant. I noticed a smudge on the granite counter, maybe a drop of wine or something. I tried to rub it off with my thumb, but it wouldn't move. I looked for a sponge, but the place was too clean. No scrub brushes, nothing. I stood there for a few minutes, obsessively rubbing that one tiny spot. I just wanted to ruin something. I wanted to scratch the counter or spill the champagne on the rug. I wanted to leave a mark. He couldn't just pay someone to clean up. I eventually gave up. The smudge stayed there. I left around 2 p.m. The drive back was a nightmare. I-5 was backed up for miles because of a wreck near Tukwila, and the rain was just pouring. I sat in traffic watching my wipers struggle, and I just felt exhausted. When I got home, the house looked the same. Beige siding, trimmed hedges, gray mist. It looked like a sanctuary, but it also felt like a prison. Maya was in the living room struggling with math. She looked up at me with that furrowed brow. She gets she looks so much like Mark when she does that. Mom, I can't figure out this word problem, she said. I sat down next to her. I could still smell the peonies and that expensive soap on my clothes. I looked at the numbers, but they didn't make sense. I wondered if Maya knew. Kids usually sense when things are off. I wondered if she noticed how Mark looks at his phone, or how I've just drifted into the background. "I'll help you," I said. My voice sounded weird, like it was coming from far away. We worked on the math for an hour. Around 4:30, the garage door opened. Mark came in with his briefcase and some Thai food from a place I like. He looked tired, tie loosened, the perfect hard-working dad. "Hey," he said, kissing my cheek. I picked up Thai thought we could all eat together. I looked at him, and I didn't see the man I'd loved for 15 years. I just saw a stranger who had a map for how to destroy me. The domestic anchor he wanted to cut loose. "That sounds lovely, Mark," I said. I think I sounded cold. We ate dinner. Mark talked about his day, complaining about some employee who couldn't format a spreadsheet. He talked about the HOA meeting and the landscaping. He sounded so confident. I just watched him chew. I thought about the navy sheets and the peonies. I thought about the guy in the photo who was actually laughing. "You're very quiet tonight, Lil," he said. "Everything okay at work? Did that California couple take the Colonial?" "They're still thinking about it," I told him. "They're worried about mold in the basement." I almost laughed. He's talking about the value of a house while he's living in a 12-story building 3 blocks from his office. He's talking about value while figuring out how to replace me. After dinner, I put Maya in her pajamas and tucked her in. I stayed there for a while, just listening to her breathe. He thought he could just exit, but he underestimated the anchor. He thought I was just part of the furniture, the person who keeps the lights on and the clothes clean. He forgot that the person who runs the house is the one who knows where everything is buried. I went downstairs and found Mark in his office. The door was open. He was on the phone, speaking in this low, intimate voice. I didn't need to hear the words. I just leaned against the wall and listened to that warmth in his voicey kind. He doesn't use with me anymore. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to throw the Thai food at him. I was still heartbroken, but there was this quiet rage under it. I went into the kitchen and opened the junk drawer. I was looking for a rubber band, but I got distracted by some old pizza coupons from a place that closed years ago. There were a bunch of pens that didn't work and some random staples. I spent a few minutes just throwing the trash away, clearing the space. I waited for him to hang up. When he came out of the office, he looked refreshed, like that call had given him a second wind. "I'm going to head up," he said. "Big day tomorrow." "Good night, Mark." I stayed downstairs for a long time. I opened my laptop and went to the cloud drive. I uploaded the photos of the apartment, the sheets, and a scan of that exit strategy folder. I just stared at the screen. I wasn't the sunny real estate agent or the heart of the home anymore. I was a woman with a ledger. He spent months planning his transition, thinking he was the only one with a plan. He forgot I'm the one who handles the details. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. It was still raining. I looked at the driveway, the beige curtains, all of it. I didn't really care anymore. I stood there for a minute, in the dark for a minute, listening to the house, feeling completely awake. The rain didn't stop. It just changed intensity, shifting from a heavy downpour to that persistent, clinging mist that makes everything in the Pacific Northwest feel like it's slowly dissolving. I spent the first week after my visit to the city apartment in a state of suspended animation. I did the laundry. I drove Maya to her soccer practice. I made sure the dishwasher was unloaded before Mark got home. I played the part of the supportive wife with a precision that would have impressed him if he had been paying any attention. The hardest part wasn't the lying, it was the coldness that had settled into my bones. It wasn't a sadness exactly. Sadness is heavy and warm, like a thick blanket. This was something else. It was a clinical detachment, a feeling that I was observing my own life from a great distance, like I was watching a movie of a woman I used to know. I think it was a Tuesday or maybe Wednesday, because I remember the neighborhood was complaining about the fallen branches from the storm on the next door app when I made the first call. I didn't use the house phone and I didn't use my primary cell. I bought a cheap prepaid phone at a CV's 3 towns over, the kind of thing people use when they don't want to be tracked. I had seen a recommendation for a lawyer named Sarah Jenkins on a forum for high net worth divorces. Sarah didn't specialize in mediation or amicable separations. She specialized in the kind of warfare that happened in boardrooms and courtrooms, where assets were hidden and lives were dismantled with surgical precision. The meeting took place in a drab office building in Bellevue, the kind of place that looks like a government annex. The carpets were a depressing shade of industrial blue, and the waiting room smelled like stale coffee and old magazines. Sarah Jenkins was a woman in her 50s with a sharp bob and glasses that looked like they could cut through steel. She didn't smile, and she didn't offer me a tissue when I showed her the photos of the apartment and the scan of Mark's exit strategy. He's been methodical, Sarah said, flipping through the documents. Her voice was dry, devoid of the performative empathy most lawyers use to make clients feel comfortable. He's trying to build a narrative where you are the domestic dependent, the one who lacks the professional acumen to handle a complex asset split. He's positioning himself as the sole provider and the primary driver of the family's wealth. I'm a licensed real estate agent, I told her. I've managed properties. I've handled contracts. On paper, yes. But in the eyes of a court, if you haven't been the primary breadwinner for the last decade, he'll try to paint you as a luxury accessory to his success. He wants you to feel like you have no leverage. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. Do you have access to the separate investment account? I found the passwords. I have the statements. I've uploaded everything to a secure drive. Sarah finally gave a small, tight nod. Good. The fact that he used Joint Fund 7's small amounts to maintain a second residence is a huge win. In this state, it's not just about the cheating. It's about the dissipation of marital assets. He's been stealing from the kid's future to pay for a 26-year-old skincare routine. We can use that. I left the office feeling a strange mixture of relief and nausea. The plan was simple. I was to remain completely silent. No confrontations, no hints, no tears. I was to continue the facade of the happy, stable home, while Sarah and I quietly mapped out every single penny Mark had moved, hidden, or spent. I needed to gather every piece of evidence I could find without alerting him. If he suspected I knew, he would move the money, wipe the accounts, and likely change the locks before I could even blink. When I got home, Mark was in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of scotch. He looked relaxed, almost smug. He had spent the afternoon on a conference call, and he was in one of those moods where he felt like the king of the world. Rough day, he asked, not looking at me. Just a few listings to update, I said. I walked over to the counter and started chopping carrots for a stew. My movements were rhythmic and steady. I didn't let my hand shake. How was the call? Productive. We're looking at an expansion into the Southeast market. It might mean more travels in the spring. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask where he'd be traveling or who he'd be with. I just nodded and kept chopping. That sounds like a lot of work. You'll need to make sure your flights are booked early. He paused, looking at me for a second. You're being very agreeable lately. Lil, is everything okay? I'd just been thinking about how much we've accomplished. I lied. The words felt like ash in my mouth, but I delivered them with a soft, pleasant smile. I'm just in a good headspace. He shrugged and turned back to his drink. He was so convinced of my predictability that he didn't even question the change. To him, my good headspace was just me finally accepting the role he had carved out for me. He thought he had successfully trained me to be a background character in his own life. The following days were a blur of domesticity and espionage. I spent my mornings at the gym or running errands, but I spent my afternoons in the house digging. I started with the tax returns. I went into the hall closet where we kept the archives of our financial life. I was looking for the 2021 and 2022 filings, specifically the schedules that listed foreign assets or trust distributions. But as I was digging through the folders, I got sidetracked by a plastic organizer full of old manuals. There were manuals for a toaster we had thrown away 5 years ago, a guide for a baby monitor that Maya had outgrown when she was 2, and a stack of expired warranties for electronics that didn't even exist anymore. I found myself staring at a manual for a digital camera that had been broken since 2016, wondering why Mark insisted on keeping these things. It was so pointless. I spent about 15 minutes just sorting the manuals by date, feeling this irrational irritation that he kept this useless clutter while simultaneously hiding a whole apartment in the city. I eventually shoved them back in and found the tax returns. There it was, a disclosure of a small trust account in the Cayman Islands. It wasn't a massive sum, but it was there. He hadn't told me about it. He had listed it as a family legacy item, but based on the dates, he had opened it himself about 4 years ago. I took photos of every page. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settling in my chest. Every lie he told was just another line item on the ledger. I started noticing things about him that I had ignored for years. The way he would check his reflection in every mirror he passed, not out of vanity, but to make sure the mask was still perfectly in place. The way he would use a certain tone of voice, with me patronizing, gentle tone that he probably thought was affectionate, but was actually just a way of keeping me small. He treated me like a child who needed to be managed, a sweet, simple woman who didn't understand the complexities of his world. I wondered when I had become that person to him. Had I actually been that naive? Or had he just projected that image onto me so he could feel more powerful? I thought about the early years of our marriage, when we had lived in a tiny rental in Tacoma and shared a single laptop. We had talked about building a life together, about supporting each other's ambitions. I had stepped back from my career to handle the kids, believing that we were making a joint decision for the benefit of the family. I had traded my professional growth for his, thinking it was an investment in our collective future. I realize now that it wasn't a joint decision. It was a trade-off that only benefited him. He got a supportive home, a managed household, and a wife who didn't challenge him, while I got the privilege of being the heart of the home. One Friday, Mark announced he had to go to a leadership summit in San Francisco for the weekend. He was acting his usual part, the stressed executive, the dutiful father who hated to be away from his children. He kissed Maya on the forehead and gave me a quick, distracted peck on the cheek. "I'll be back Sunday evening," he said. "I'll call you when I land." As soon as his SUV cleared the driveway, I called Sarah. "He's gone for the weekend," I said. "Good. I want you to do a full sweep of his home office, not just the drawers. Look for hidden compartments, external hard drives, and any physical logs of his expenses. If Hez is methodical as he seems, he'll have a backup of everything. He just won't keep it in a target box." I spent the next 6 hours in his office. I didn't just look in the drawers, I felt, along the edges of the mahogany desk, checking for false bottoms. I looked behind the books on the shelves. I even checked the vents in the ceiling. I found it in the most obvious place, a fake book on the shelf, disguised as a volume of corporate law. Inside was a small encrypted USB drive and a handwritten list of passwords. I didn't try to open the drive myself. I knew better. I put it in a padded envelope and drove it directly to Sarah's office. As I drove through the rainy streets of Bellevue, I felt a strange sense of lightness. I wasn't the woman who was afraid of the dark anymore. I was the one who knew exactly where the light switches were. I passed a Target on the way, and for a moment I thought about going in and buying a bunch of peonies, just to leave them all over the house for him to find. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized I knew about the apartment. I wanted to scream, to break things, to tell him that I had seen the domestic anchor comment and that I was going to drag him down with me. But I didn't. I just kept driving. The rage was still there, but it had evolved. It was no longer a fire, it was a glacier. It was slow, heavy, and unstoppable. When I got home, the house was quiet. Maya was at a sleepover, and the silence felt oppressive. I went into the kitchen and realized we were out of milk. I stood there staring at the empty carton, and suddenly I started to cry. Not because of the affair, or the secret accounts, or the what he did. I just started crying because I was tired of buying the milk. I was tired of knowing exactly which brand of yogurt the kids liked and which detergent didn't irritate Maya's skin, and when the vac filter needed to be changed. I was tired of the invisible labor of existing for everyone else. I cried for maybe 10 minutes, leaning against the refrigerator, the cold metal pressing into my forehead. Then I wiped my face, threw the carton in the trash, and went upstairs to bed. Monday morning arrived with the same gray drizzle. Mark came home on Sunday night, smelling of expensive hotel soap and airport coffee. He was in a great mood, telling me about the synergies he had discussed with the other VPs. He seemed completely oblivious to the fact that his entire life was currently being disassembled by a woman in a blue-carpeted office in Bellevue. "You seem peaceful, Lil," he said during dinner. "I like this version of you. You've really settled into a nice rhythm." "I have," I said, sipping my water. "I feel like I finally understand where I fit in." He beamed at me. He actually beamed. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully managed me into a state of permanent contentment. Over the next month, the process became a routine. I would spend my days acting as the perfect suburban wife, and my evenings coordinating with Sarah. We were building a comprehensive case. We had the secret apartment, the slush fund, the Cayman Islands account, and the exit strategy documents. Sarah told me that we had enough to not only secure a very favorable settlement, but to potentially leave Mark in a position where he would be fighting to keep his own house. The more evidence we gathered, the less I cared about the emotional side of what he did. The pain was still there, but it had become a secondary concern. My primary concern was the math. I wanted to know exactly how much my stability was worth in dollars and cents. I wanted to be compensated for every hour I had spent maintaining a facade for his benefit. I remember it was a Tuesday or maybe it was a Thursday, because I think I had a lunch date with another agent when Sarah called me with a breakthrough. She had managed to get a mirror of the encrypted USB drive. He wasn't just planning his exit from the marriage, Sarah told me. He's been skimming from the corporate accounts. Not a lot, but enough to fund the city apartment and the gifts for the girl. It's a violation of his fiduciary duty to the board. If this gets out, he's not just looking at a divorce, he's looking at a termination for cause and potential legal action from his company. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Starbucks, the rain drumming on the roof. I felt a surge of power that was almost intoxicating. He had spent years making me feel small, making me feel like I was just a part of the machinery of his life. But he had forgotten that the machinery was what kept him running. "What do we do with that?" I asked. "We hold it," Sarah said. "We don't use it yet, we use it as the ultimate leverage. When we file for divorce, we present him with the evidence of the affair and the financial dissipation first. If he fights us, if he tries to play the provider card, or tries to limit your settlement, we let him know that we have the corporate records. He will sign whatever we want just to keep his career intact." I hung up the phone and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked the same. The same blonde hair, the same tired eyes, the same neutral expression. But I felt like a stranger to myself. I wondered if I would ever be able to trust anyone again, or if I had permanently shifted into this new version of myself, the version that saw people as liabilities and assets. I drove home, stopping at Target on the way. I didn't buy anything for the house. I bought a new set of high thread count sheets for myself in a deep, bold navy blue. When I got home, Mark was in the living room reading a report. He looked up and smiled at me. "Hey, honey, did you get the groceries?" "I forgot the groceries," I said, walking past him toward the stairs. He frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "You forgot the groceries? Since when do you forget the groceries?" I stopped and looked back at him. I didn't smile and I didn't frown. I just looked at him with a clinical, detached interest. "I guess I'm just starting to forget some things, Mark," I said. "It's funny how that happens." I went upstairs and stripped the old beige sheets off my side of the bed. I replaced them with the navy blue ones. They felt cool and heavy against my skin. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sound of the rain and the muffled noise of Mark downstairs, probably wondering why I had been so forgetful. I thought about Elena, the 26-year-old analyst. I wondered if she knew that she was being funded by a man who was terrified of his own wife. I wondered if she knew that the luxury apartment she lived in was just a line item in a legal strategy. I didn't hate her anymore. I just felt sorry for her. She thought she was the new, exciting version of Mark's life, but she was just another asset he was managing. Eventually, she would become stagnant too. He would find a 22-year-old, and she would become the domestic anchor he wanted to cut loose. I closed my eyes and imagined the look on his face when Sarah finally served the papers. I imagined the moment he realized that the stable wife he had ignored for a decade was the only person who actually knew how to destroy him. I didn't feel happy, exactly, but I felt awake. That night, Mark came to bed and tried to pull me close. He whispered something about a vacation to Hawaii in the summer, something about reconnecting as a couple. I stayed still, my body rigid, smelling the faint scent of his expensive cologne. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in. I just lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, counting the seconds until he fell asleep. I wondered if he could feel the coldness coming off me, or if he was too blinded by his own arrogance to notice. I suspect he didn't. He probably just thought I was tired from a long day of real estate. As he finally drifted off, his breathing becoming deep and steady, I reached over and gently moved his hand off my waist. I turned onto my side, facing away from him, and stared out at the rain blurring the window. I thought about the 401k, the Cayman Islands account, and the navy blue sheets. I was no longer the heart of the home. I was the architect of its demolition. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I spent the next morning organizing the kids' school folders. It was a tedious task, checking for permission slips and unfinished homework. I found a drawing Maya had done in art class, a picture of our family standing in front of our house. She had drawn us all holding hands, with a big yellow sun in the corner of the page. I looked at the drawing for a long time. I felt a momentary pang of guilt, a flicker of the woman I used to be. But then I remembered the exit strategy folder. I remembered the way Mark had described me as a stagnant environment. I carefully tucked the drawing into a folder and put it away. I wasn't destroying the family. I was just clearing the wreckage, so that Maya and her brother could actually have a chance at a real one. I went downstairs and found Mark in the kitchen, eating toast. He looked at me and smiled, that same confident, oblivious smile. "Morning, Lil, you okay?" "I am wonderful, Mark," I said. And this time the smile I gave him was completely genuine. "I'm absolutely wonderful." He didn't notice the difference. He just nodded and went back to his toast, completely unaware that the clock was ticking. I went to the sink and started washing the dishes, focusing on the feel of the warm water on my hands and the scent of the lemon soap. It was a boring, normal morning in the suburbs, and it was the most exciting day of my life.